For years, I had lived in the tranquil embrace of our suburban neighborhood. Everything seemed picture-perfect on the surface, a haven where neighbors chatted over white picket fences, and children's laughter echoed through the streets. But beneath this facade of idyllic normalcy lurked an insidious secret that would unravel the very fabric of our lives. Our neighbor, Mr. Thompson, and the malevolent cult next door. Mr. Thompson resided in the dilapidated Victorian house that stood as a sinister sentinel beside my own. Its once glorious facade had withered into a grotesque mockery of its former self, and a perpetual shroud of darkness enveloped it, even during the brightest of days. In our neighborhood, where familiarity was a virtue, Mr. Thompson was an enigma. Stories about him circulated like ghostly whispers among the neighbors. Tales of his peculiar behavior were spoken of in hushed tones at neighborhood gatherings. He was a recluse, a man whose face was seldom seen, except for the rare glimpses we caught when he scurried to retrieve his mail under the cover of twilight. Rumors about his odd habits were abundant. Some claimed to have heard him conversing with unseen entities in the dead of night, his voice carrying an unsettling and tormented tone. Others swore they'd witnessed bizarre symbols etched into his lawn, formations that defied logic and seemed to shift in the moonlight. But it wasn't until one fateful night that the true extent of his malevolence was revealed to me. A night when my curiosity overcame my fear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood into a shadowy embrace, I found myself compelled to investigate. From my bedroom window, I watched Mr. Thompson's house with a sense of trepidation. An eerie blue light emanated from within, flickering like a malevolent beacon. Shadows danced on the windows, their movements unnatural, as though they were taunting me. Driven by a morbid fascination, I slipped out of my own home, my footsteps muffled by the deafening silence that had descended upon the neighborhood. A bone-chilling unease gripped me as I approached Mr. Thompson's decaying abode. The front gate groaned in protest as I pushed it open, and I crept onto his porch, the wood creaking beneath my weight. The front door stood ajar, as if beckoning me inside. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open further and entered the dimly lit hallway. It felt like I had stepped into an entirely different world. The air was thick with an unplaceable stench, a nauseating mixture of decay and something altogether more sinister. As I ventured further, I noticed the grotesque paintings that adorned the walls. Twisted faces leered at me, their expressions contorted in agony. Each step I took seemed to echo through the house, as though the very walls were whispering secrets to one another. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the haunting melody that grew louder with every step. It led me to a room at the end of the hallway, a room bathed in that same eerie blue light. Inside, I found Mr. Thompson, his back turned to me, his voice a guttural chant. He stood before a nightmarish contraption, a web of wires and tubes that pulsed with a sickly energy. I couldn't discern the source of the haunting music, yet it filled the room, wrapping around my senses like a suffocating fog. The walls were adorned with grotesque symbols, some of which seemed to writhe and shift before my very eyes. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced to the rhythm of Mr. Thompson's chanting. But what truly chilled me to the bone were the spirits, ethereal figures, twisted and contorted, swirled around him. Their eyes were hollow voids, their mouths agape in silent screams. They seemed to feed off his frenzied energy, growing stronger with each passing moment. As I watched in terror, one of the spirits turned its gaze toward. In the heart of a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled among neatly manicured lawns and white picket fences, a sense of tranquility belied the horrors that lurked beneath the surface. It was a neighborhood where families felt safe, where children played freely in the streets, and where the idea of sinister cults and rituals seemed inconceivable. But as I was about to discover, evil often thrived in the most unexpected places. My neighbor, Dr. Victor Gravewalker, was the embodiment of eccentricity. A tall, gaunt man with piercing, calculating eyes, he lived in a sprawling mansion that had been in his family for generations. His reclusive nature and strange habits had always been the subject of neighborhood gossip, but I had never paid much attention to the rumors until an eerie incident shook the very foundation of our community. It began on a moonless night, when I awoke to the sound of agonized screams echoing through the neighborhood. Peering through my bedroom window, I spotted a procession of shadowy figures draped in dark robes marching toward Dr. Gravewalker's mansion. Their chants were guttural and otherworldly, reverberating through the night like a sinister incantation. Unable to resist my curiosity, I ventured outside and followed the eerie procession from a distance. As I drew nearer to Dr. Gravewalker's mansion, I noticed the pungent scent of burning herbs and a malevolent aura that hung heavily in the air. It was a feeling of dread that penetrated to my very core. My heart pounded as I watched the cultists gather around the mansion's entrance. Dr. Gravewalker stood at the forefront, his eyes ablaze with a fanatic zeal. He raised a knife, and the room fell into a sinister silence. What followed was a ritual of unimaginable horror. The cultists, their faces contorted in a grotesque display of devotion, began to chant in unison, their voices rising in a crescendo of madness. Dr. Gravewalker's knife descended, and the room was bathed in a sickly red glow. In that moment, I witnessed the unthinkable. A sacrificial victim, bound and gagged, lay on an altar at the center of the room. Dr. Gravewalker, a man I had known as an eccentric recluse, now reveled in his role as the cult's high priest. The victim's screams pierced the air, drowned out by the chanting of the cultists. As I watched in abject horror, I realized that I had stumbled upon a cult that had long eluded detection, one that reveled in bloodshed and dark rituals. The victim's life was... Unable to contain my terror, I fled from the scene, my heart pounding with the weight of the horrors I had witnessed. I knew that I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The sinister devotion of Dr. Gravewalker and his cult had left an indelible mark on my soul. In the days that followed, I lived in constant fear, knowing that the cult's malevolence extended far beyond our quiet neighborhood. Their sinister rituals continued under the cover of darkness, and their influence spread like a contagion, ensnaring those who dared to cross their path. I became consumed by an obsession to expose the cult and its nefarious leader, Dr. Gravewalker. But the horrors I had witnessed had left scars that ran deep. I knew that confronting the darkness would come at a terrifying cost, one that would test the limits of my sanity and the depths of my courage. As I delved deeper into the web of the occult, I realized that the only way to confront the cult's sinister devotion was to become a part of it, to infiltrate their ranks and expose their malevolence from within. But in doing so, I would be risking not only my own life, but also my very soul. The story of Dr. Gravewalker and his cult is a chilling reminder that evil can manifest in the most unexpected places, that even in the midst of suburban tranquility, the darkness can take root and thrive. It is a tale of terror, of a psycho neighbor, and the mind-disturbing cult rituals that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life.